Today, we're diving into a story that sounds almost like a fable. It's about a desert so vast it was called the Sea of Death, a plan that seemed almost impossible, and a very common animal that's seen as a terrible pest in one country but became an ecological hero in another. Okay, so let's just lay it out: the rabbit. On the one hand, you have Australia. They have a staggering 200 million rabbits running wild. That's almost 10 for every single person. And they are, officially, a destructive pest. But then you look at China, where millions of these same animals were deliberately brought into a desert, not as a plague, but as a key part of an incredible solution. And that's the big mystery we're unpacking today. How is that even possible? How can one animal wear two such different hats, villain and hero? Well, to get the answer, we need to travel to one of the harshest places on the planet. Our story really kicks off in northern China, in the Kubuki Desert. Now, this place more than earned its nickname, the Sea of Death. It's this enormous, unforgiving landscape that was constantly growing, relentlessly swallowing up farmland, villages, everything in its path. Now, there's a technical term for this process: desertification. It's basically when good, fertile land turns into desert. But the Kubuki, well, it was on a whole other level. It wasn't just creeping, it was aggressively eating away at the green land all around it. The scale of this problem, it's just mind-boggling. We're talking about 500,000 acres of usable land disappearing under sand every single year. To give you some perspective, that's like losing an area bigger than the entire city of Los Angeles, year after year. People tried to fight it back in the 50s and 60s, but nothing worked. The desert was just too powerful. And then a local entrepreneur named Wang Wenbio showed up with a plan that, frankly, most people thought was completely nuts. So what was this crazy idea? Well, it was actually simple, but kind of brilliant. His team started by laying out these huge square grids made of dried bushes right on the sand. And inside each square, they planted willow trees. Now, willows are amazing survivors. Their roots can tunnel 300 feet down to find water. The grids of bushes, they had a simple job: act as a tiny wall to stop the brutal desert winds from blowing the sand away and drying out the young trees. And you know what? It started working. The trees actually took root. But, and this is a big but, this early success created a brand new and very expensive problem. See, for the willow wood to be valuable for things like paper and furniture, you have to constantly trim the new shoots off the sides so the main trunk grows nice and thick. Trying to do that by hand for thousands and thousands of trees in the middle of a remote desert, it was a logistical nightmare. The entire project was about to collapse under its own weight. So, how do you solve an expensive problem like that? Not with some fancy new machine or a bigger budget. Nope. The answer was something no one saw coming. Yep, the answer was the Rex rabbit. This specific breed is actually famous for its super soft, almost otter-like fur, which is pretty valuable. But it wasn't their fancy fur that made them the heroes of this story. Oh no, it was their appetite. And this is where the pure genius of the system really clicks. First off, the rabbits absolutely love to eat those new willow shoots, the exact same ones that needed to be pruned. So boom, you've got free 24/7 labor, letting the tree trunks grow thick and valuable. But wait, it gets even better. The rabbit waste is a fantastic natural fertilizer, enriching the totally sterile sand. And for the final piece of the puzzle, rabbits can't digest grass seeds, so their droppings basically reseeded the entire desert floor, and new grass started to sprout. It created this perfect, self-sustaining loop. So what started as this wild experiment pretty quickly turned into what you can only call an eco-economic miracle. The results, after about 3 decades of work, are just staggering. They didn't just change the landscape, they transformed the lives of everyone who lived there. The result? Get this. Over 6,000 square kilometers of barren sand. That's an area almost the size of Delaware, and a full third of the entire desert has been turned back into green, living land. The Sea of Death was literally coming back to life. And of course, when the land recovered, so did the economy. Local farmers who had been barely scraping by were encouraged to start raising Rex rabbits. Today, an average farmer's income has skyrocketed to almost $10,000 a year. That's a completely life-changing amount of money for a region that used to have nothing. And we're not talking about just a few families getting a boost. It's estimated that 100,000 people have had their lives totally turned around by this new green economy. People who had been forced to flee the advancing desert, they're now coming back home to build a future. So you'd think the story ends there, right? Desert turned green, people are thriving. What more could you do? Well, it turns out the innovation in Kabuki didn't stop with trees and rabbits. They decided to level up. Big time. Check this out. This is the Jinquan solar farm. It's so massive that from space the panels form an image of a galloping horse. But here's the brilliant part. It does way more than just make clean energy. The panels create shade, which means less water evaporates and grass can actually grow underneath them. They also act as a windbreak, slowing the wind by 50%, which stops erosion. And who do you think is mowing all that new grass under the solar panels? You guessed it, the Rex rabbits. It's a power plant, a farm, and a desert fighting machine all rolled into one. Okay, so this brings us all the way back to our original question. If these rabbits can work miracles in a Chinese desert, why are they such an absolute disaster in Australia? Well, the answer turns out to be surprisingly simple. It all boils down to one single idea: control versus chaos. In Australia, rabbits were just dropped into a natural environment that had few predators, and they were left to breed, well, like rabbits. It's a classic ecological invasion. But in China, the rabbits were introduced into a completely man-made, carefully designed system. They're not invaders, they're employees with a very specific job to do. And that's really the big lesson from the Kabuki Desert. It's this powerful testament to the idea that humans and nature don't have to be at odds. With the right kind of thinking, with a bit of ingenuity, this project shows that if we work with nature, we can turn even the most hostile places into gardens of life. It's just an incredible story about looking at a problem and seeing an opportunity instead of a curse. It's about how one small, furry animal put in exactly the right place at the right time helped achieve what everyone thought was impossible. It really makes you stop and wonder, if we can do that, what's the next impossible thing we can solve?